The massive docking bay of Meridian Cross Station hummed with activity as Emperor Dravenor's fleet descended through the atmospheric shields. The station itself was a marvel of neutral engineering, a place where species from across the galaxy could meet without the territorial tensions that plagued their home worlds. Today, it buzzed with extra energy because the Dragon Emperor himself had chosen to grace them with his presence. Dravenor stepped off his royal transport with the confidence of someone who had ruled for over a millennium. His scales gleamed like polished obsidian under the station's artificial lights, and his wings were folded perfectly against his massive frame. Behind him, an entourage of advisors and warriors followed in strict formation. To any observer, this looked like a standard diplomatic visit. The dragons were here to negotiate trade routes and discuss their position within the Galactic Council. Everything appeared normal and proper. But inside the heavily shielded medical transport at the rear of the procession, something far more personal was hidden. Ash, the Emperor's youngest hatchling, lay curled inside a specialized containment pod. The little dragon was barely the size of a large dog, his scales a dull gray instead of the brilliant colors his siblings had displayed at his age. His wings hung crooked against his small body, twisted from birth in a way that would never allow proper flight. His fire chambers, the organs that gave dragons their legendary flame, were damaged and weak. In dragon society, these imperfections were more than just physical problems. They were marks of shame. Dragons prided themselves on strength, on power, on perfection. A hatchling born weak was traditionally left to die or exiled to the outer territories where no one would speak of them again. But Dravenor had broken tradition. He had kept Ash alive, hidden him away, and brought him along on this journey. Even he wasn't entirely sure why. Perhaps some small part of him hoped the advanced medical facilities of Meridian Cross might offer answers his own physicians could not provide. The Imperial procession moved through the station's main corridors with practiced precision. Delegates from various worlds bowed or offered their species equivalent gestures of respect. The Emperor acknowledged them with barely a glance. His mind was elsewhere, worried about the secret he carried and what it might mean if anyone discovered it. Then, without warning, everything went wrong. The medical pod stabilizers malfunctioned as they passed through the station's commercial district. Alarms blared inside the transport. The containment field flickered once, twice, then failed completely. Before anyone could react, the pod's door slid open and Ash tumbled out onto the polished floor of the marketplace. The little hatchling hit the ground hard and let out a high-pitched chirp of fear and confusion. His twisted wings flailed uselessly as he tried to right himself. Heat radiated from his body in waves, a stress response that all dragons displayed when frightened. The temperature around him spiked dramatically. Chaos erupted instantly. Shopkeepers abandoned their stalls. Diplomatic guests who had been browsing the various Earth, Centauri and Regelian vendors scattered in every direction. It didn't matter that Ash was small or injured. Dragons were apex predators, the dominant military power in 3 sectors of space. Even their children commanded instinctive fear from other species. People ran, screamed, and dove for cover as if a bomb had been dropped in their midst. The Imperial guards moved to surround Ash, their weapons drawn not to protect him but to contain the situation. The Emperor himself strode forward, his expression unreadable but his body language tight with barely controlled panic. This was his worst nightmare. His secret was exposed in the most public way possible, in front of representatives from dozens of worlds who would spread this story across the galaxy within hours. But then something unexpected happened. Someone moved against the tide of fleeing bodies. A human woman in a simple work uniform pushed through the crowd, running toward the frightened hatchling instead of away from him. Her name tag read, Emily Brooks, and identified her as staff at Joe's Earth Cafe, a modest little restaurant that served nostalgic food to homesick humans working on the station. Emily didn't hesitate. She didn't slow down to assess the danger or calculate the risk. She simply dropped to her knees beside Ash and scooped him up in her arms, cradling his small body against her uniform apron. The heat from his scales was intense, easily hot enough to cause serious burns to human skin. Her apron began to smoke slightly where his body pressed against it. But Emily didn't drop him. She didn't even flinch. Instead, she began speaking to him in a low, soothing voice. The words didn't matter as much as the tone. She made soft shushing sounds, the kind any parent might make to a frightened child. Her hands moved gently over his body, checking for obvious injuries while somehow avoiding his sharper scales and the small spurts of flame that occasionally escaped his damaged fire chambers. Emperor Dravenor stopped dead in his tracks. He had lived for over 1,000 years. He had seen countless battles, negotiations, betrayals, and moments of both cowardice and courage. But he had never seen anything quite like this. A human, one of the species his people openly dismissed as weak and primitively emotional, was protecting his son. Not just protecting him, but comforting him with a tenderness that dragon culture had long since bred out of itself. The royal guards reached Emily within seconds, their weapons trained on her. The captain of the guard, a scarred veteran named Thornscale, barked an order for her to release the hatchling immediately. His voice carried the full authority and threat that came with his position. Lesser beings had died for far smaller acts of disrespect toward the imperial family. Emily looked up at the surrounding guards, then at the emperor himself. Her face showed awareness of the danger she was in, but no fear. "He's hurt," she said simply. "Give me a minute to make sure he's okay." The audacity of it stunned everyone present. A human waitress refusing a direct order from dragon imperial guards, while holding the emperor's son. It should have resulted in her immediate arrest, possibly her execution. Thornscale raised his weapon higher, his finger moving toward the trigger. But Emperor Dravener raised one massive claw, stopping his guard with a gesture. His ancient eyes were locked on Emily, studying her with an intensity that made several nearby observers step back nervously. He watched how her hands moved over Ash's body, professional and careful. He watched how the hatchling's panic chirping gradually quieted under her ministrations. He watched how she positioned his twisted wing more comfortably without being told it caused him pain. Something was happening inside the Emperor's chest, something he hadn't felt in centuries. It was curiosity mixed with something even more dangerous, doubt. Doubt about everything his culture had taught him. Doubt about what strength really meant. For the first time in his 1,000-year reign, Emperor Dravener wondered if perhaps dragons had been completely wrong about humans all along. Emily's hands moved across Ash's small body with the kind of confidence that came from years of experience. She wasn't rough, but she wasn't overly gentle either. Her fingers pressed along his spine, found the joints where his twisted wings connected to his back, and explored the area around his chest where his fire chambers would be located. Each touch seemed deliberate and purposeful. The little hatchling's breathing began to slow. The frantic chirping that had filled the marketplace just moments ago faded to occasional soft whimpers. His body temperature decreased noticeably as his stress response calmed. The guards surrounding them exchanged confused glances. They had never seen anyone handle a distressed dragon hatchling with such effectiveness, let alone a human. Emperor Dravener watched this display for exactly 43 seconds before his patience ran out. He stepped forward, his massive form casting a shadow over Emily and his son. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of absolute authority that had commanded armies and toppled governments. "Explain yourself, human. How do you possess knowledge of dragon physiology?" Emily didn't look up from her examination. She was checking Ash's left wing joint, feeling for any damage from the fall. "I worked at the Interspecies Wildlife Rehabilitation Center outside Denver for 6 years, she said, her tone as casual as if she were discussing the weather. "We got creatures from all over the galaxy. Reptilian species share a lot of common physiological traits. Pressure points, nerve clusters, stress responses. Once you understand the basics, you can adapt." The Emperor's eyes narrowed. "You compare my son to wildlife?" Now Emily did look up, and there was something fierce in her expression that made even Thornscale take a half step back. "I compare him to a scared kid who just took a hard fall and needs someone to make sure he's not seriously hurt. That's what he is, isn't he? Or am I missing something?" The silence that followed was deafening. No one spoke to the Emperor this way. No one challenged him with such casual disregard for his status. Several of the advisors looked like they might faint from sheer horror at witnessing such disrespect. But Dravener didn't unleash the fury everyone expected. Instead, something strange happened. The corner of his mouth twitched, almost like he wanted to smile but had forgotten how. "His condition," the Emperor said, his voice lower now, almost cautious. "My physicians have declared it permanent. Incurable. He will never fly properly. His fire will always be weak. They tell me nothing can be done." Emily finally finished her examination and shifted Ash in her arms to a more comfortable position. The hatchling curled against her, his small head tucked under her chin. "Your physicians are wrong," she said flatly. "Or at least they're not thinking creatively enough." "Explain." It was a command, but there was genuine interest behind it now. "Look, I'm not going to pretend I can cure him," Emily said, absently stroking the scales along Ash's back in a way that made him hum contentedly. "His wings are probably always going to be different. His fire chambers have structural damage that won't just heal on their own. But different doesn't mean useless. There's physical therapy, strengthening exercises tailored to his specific limitations. We could design custom braces to support his wing structure, give him stability he doesn't have naturally. Adaptive training that works with what he can do instead of focusing on what he can't. The concepts she was describing landed like bombs among the dragon delegation. One of the advisors, an elderly dragon named Crestfall, actually gasped. "You speak of accommodation," he said, making the word sound like a curse. "Of accepting weakness rather than eliminating it. This is not the dragon way." "Maybe the dragon way needs updating," Emily shot back without hesitation. "Because from where I'm standing, your way was about to let this little guy spend his whole life thinking he's broken and worthless. That's not strength. That's just cruel." Emperor Dravener stood very still. His mind was racing through implications and possibilities faster than it had moved in decades. Everything this human was saying contradicted fundamental dragon philosophy. Their entire civilization was built on the principle of survival of the fittest, of eliminating weakness to maintain the strength of their species. What she proposed was heresy of the highest order. And yet, as he watched his son resting peacefully in her arms for the first time in his short life, he couldn't dismiss it. The question that had haunted him since Ash's birth suddenly had a possible answer. Not a cure, but something perhaps more important: hope. The Emperor made his decision in that moment, though he knew it would have consequences that would ripple across his entire empire. "Come with us," he said. "Return to the dragon homeworld as Ash's personal caretaker. Help him in the ways you describe." The reaction was immediate and explosive. Crestfall nearly choked. Thornscale's weapon actually slipped from his claws in shock. Other advisors began talking over each other in heated, angry whispers. Bringing a human into the imperial palace was unthinkable. It was a violation of tradition, of protocol, of everything they held sacred. It would be seen as weakness, as the emperor admitting he needed help from an inferior species. Political rivals would use it as ammunition. The traditional factions would call for his removal. "Your Majesty, this is madness." Crestfall finally managed to sputter. "A human in the imperial palace? Caring for your heir? The council will never accept this. Your enemies will say you've gone soft, that you're unfit to rule. This could cost you everything." Dravener silenced him with a look that could have melted steel. "Then let them say it. Let them challenge me if they dare. I have made my decision." He turned back to Emily and his voice softened slightly. "You would be well compensated. Protected. Given resources and authority to do whatever you believe necessary for my son's development. But I will not lie to you about the danger. You would be entering a world where many will see your presence as an insult, where you will face hostility and possibly threats to your life. This is not a simple job offer. This is asking you to step into the center of political upheaval." Emily looked down at Ash, who had fallen asleep against her chest, his small body rising and falling with peaceful breaths. She thought about her life on Meridian Cross. It was safe, predictable, boring. She served coffee and sandwiches to travelers, went home to her tiny apartment and repeated the cycle. There was nothing wrong with that life, but there was nothing particularly right about it either. Then she thought about this little creature who had been labeled defective and hopeless by his own people. She thought about what it would mean if she could help him, really help him, not just physically but prove to an entire civilization that their assumptions about weakness were wrong. "I need 2 days to think about it," she said finally. "And to get my affairs in order if I say yes." The Emperor nodded slowly. 2 days. We depart on the third dawn." Emily handed Ash back to his father with careful instructions on how to support his wing joints. As the imperial delegation departed, she stood alone in the marketplace, surrounded by abandoned stalls and scattered merchandise from the earlier panic. She had just been offered the most dangerous job in the galaxy, teaching dragons that strength came in many forms. 2 days later, Emily Brooks boarded the imperial transport with a single bag of belongings and a head full of rehabilitation plans. She didn't look back at the safe life she was leaving behind. She was too busy looking forward to the impossible challenge ahead. The imperial transport broke through the thick atmosphere of the dragon homeworld, and Emily pressed her face against the viewport to get her first glimpse of the planet that would be her new home. What she saw made her stomach drop. The entire surface seemed to be on fire. Volcanic ranges stretched as far as the eye could see, with rivers of molten rock flowing between mountain peaks that belched ash and flame into the red-tinted sky. The temperature outside the ship registered at levels that would instantly vaporize an unprotected human. The palace itself rose from the largest volcanic caldera like a crown of obsidian and gold. It was beautiful in a terrifying way, all sharp angles and towers that seemed designed to intimidate rather than welcome. As they descended toward the landing platforms, Emily could see dragons of all sizes moving through open-air courtyards where the heat shimmered in visible waves. This was a place built by dragons for dragons, with absolutely no consideration for any other form of life. Word of her arrival had spread through the palace faster than wildfire. By the time Emily stepped off the transport, hundreds of dragons had gathered to witness the spectacle. They lined the corridors and filled the balconies, their eyes glowing with curiosity, disdain, and in some cases outright hostility. The whispers started immediately, a susurrus of hissing voices that followed her every step. A human in the imperial palace. Unthinkable. The emperor has lost his mind. Look how weak it is. One breath of proper flame would end it. This is what we've become? Accommodating lesser species? Emily kept her chin up and her expression neutral, but inside, her heart was hammering. The heat was oppressive even with the portable cooling unit they'd given her. Sweat was already soaking through her clothes. Every breath felt like inhaling from an oven. She'd known this would be difficult, but the reality was almost overwhelming. The real controversy began within the first hour. The Emperor's chief architect, an angular dragon named Iron Wing, was summoned to discuss modifications to Emily's quarters. The conversation quickly became heated. You want me to install cooling systems? Iron Wing's voice dripped with contempt. In the Imperial Palace? We have never, in 3,000 years of history, altered our home for another species' comfort. It's degrading. It's an admission that we need them, that we're somehow lesser for not accommodating their weakness. Emily listened to this tirade while standing in what was supposed to be her room, a chamber where the ambient temperature was hot enough to cook meat. Finally, she'd had enough. It's not about being lesser or greater, she said, her voice cutting through Iron Wing's complaints. It's about being practical. You want me to help Ash? Then I need to be alive and functional to do it. Unless you prefer I pass out from heatstroke every few hours. That would be real productive. The cooling chambers were installed over the next 3 days, though the grumbling never stopped. Noble dragons made pointed comments about the embarrassing accommodations. Political rivals of the emperor used it as evidence that he was going soft, that he was allowing his judgment to be clouded by sentiment. The traditional faction began holding secret meetings to discuss what they called the human problem. Emily ignored all of it. She had work to do. Her first real session with Ash took place in a converted training hall that had been adjusted to a temperature Emily could actually survive in. The little hatchling was nervous, his twisted wings tucked tight against his body. He'd spent his entire short life being treated as defective, something to hide away and be ashamed of. The idea that someone actually wanted to work with him was foreign and frightening. All right, buddy, Emily said, kneeling down to his eye level. Here's how this is going to work. I'm going to explain everything before we do it. I'm going to tell you why we're doing it. And if something hurts or feels wrong, you tell me immediately. You're not broken, Ash. Your body just works differently and we're going to figure out exactly how it works best. Deal? The approach was revolutionary. Dragon hatchlings were expected to learn through observation and instinct. Adults didn't explain things to them, didn't ask for their input, didn't treat them as intelligent beings capable of understanding their own bodies. Emily's methods seemed absurd to every dragon who witnessed them. But they worked. Emily started with careful assessments, spending hours just watching how Ash moved, where he felt pain, what positions felt natural to him. She took notes constantly, sketching designs and making calculations. Then she began designing the wing braces, custom supports that would work with his twisted bone structure rather than trying to force it into a normal shape. The exercises she created were gentle at first, focused on building strength in muscles that had never been properly used. She talked him through every movement. Feel that pull along your back? That's good. That means those muscles are waking up. They've been sleeping your whole life, and now we're teaching them what they're supposed to do. Ash began responding in ways that shocked everyone. He started asking questions, engaging with the process, showing excitement when he felt himself getting stronger. Emily celebrated every tiny victory with genuine enthusiasm that made the watching dragons uncomfortable. She threw small parties when he held a stretch for 10 seconds longer than before. She created charts showing his progress and displayed them proudly. She treated him like he was accomplishing something remarkable because he was. Emperor Dravener attended every session. At first, he told himself it was for security, to ensure Emily wasn't somehow harming his son. But that was a lie and he knew it. He came because he was fascinated. He watched Emily work with a focus that reminded him of studying battle strategies, except this was entirely different. She wasn't trying to make Ash into something he wasn't. She was finding out who he actually was and helping him become the best version of that. The breakthrough came 6 weeks after Emily's arrival. She'd finished the prototype wing braces, elegant structures of lightweight alloy that supported Ash's twisted bones without restricting his movement. They'd practiced with them for days, building up his strength and confidence. "Today's the day," Emily announced. "We're going to try actual hovering. Not flying, not yet. Just lifting off the ground and holding steady. You ready?" Ash's eyes were bright with nervous excitement. "What if I can't? Then we adjust the braces and try again tomorrow." "But Ash, I've seen your progress. I've felt how strong you've gotten. I think you can do this. More importantly, I think you know you can do it too. Trust yourself." With the braces properly fitted and Emily's guidance, Ash crouched low, then pushed upward with his legs while extending his wings. The braces held firm, distributing the force properly across his damaged structure. For 3 seconds, then 5, then 10, the little hatchling hung suspended in the air, his wings beating in a steady rhythm that would have been impossible without the supports. Then something happened that no one who witnessed it would ever forget. Emperor Dravener, the ancient ruler who had commanded legions and conquered worlds, who had shown nothing but iron strength for over a millennium, felt something hot roll down his scaled cheek. Then another. He was crying. Dragons didn't cry. The biological capability existed, but it simply wasn't done. It was considered a weakness so profound that there were no cultural contexts for it. But watching his son hover there, seeing the pure joy on Ash's face as he experienced flight for the first time, seeing him feel pride instead of shame, broke something fundamental inside the Emperor's carefully constructed walls. He wept openly and he didn't care who saw. After that day something changed. The Emperor began seeking Emily out, not for updates on Ash's progress, but for conversations. He asked her about human culture, about how humans treated their disabled, their elderly, their vulnerable. About their strange belief that every life had inherent value regardless of strength or ability. "It doesn't make logical sense," he said during one late-night conversation in Emily's cooling chamber. "From a pure survival standpoint, protecting the weak drains resources." "Does it though?" Emily challenged. "Some of humanity's greatest scientists, artists, and leaders have been people who wouldn't have survived in a might-makes-right society. Stephen Hawking couldn't move or speak without assistance, but his mind changed our understanding of the universe. We would have lost that if we'd decided he wasn't worth the resources. How many geniuses have dragons eliminated because they didn't look strong enough?" The question haunted Dravener because he couldn't answer it. And that terrified him because deep down he was beginning to suspect that everything his civilization had built itself on might be fundamentally flawed. The emergency session of the Dragon High Council was called exactly 3 months after Emily's arrival at the palace. The circular chamber was carved from volcanic rock, with seats arranged in ascending tiers so that every council member could look down upon whoever stood in the center. It was designed to intimidate, and it worked. 12 of the most powerful dragons in the Empire sat in judgment, their eyes glowing like coals in the dim light. Emily wasn't present for this particular meeting, but its subject was entirely about her and what she represented. Lord Blackscale, the oldest member of the council and leader of the traditionalist faction, rose to speak first. His voice carried the weight of centuries. 3 months ago, our Emperor made a decision that has shaken the foundations of our civilization. He brought a human into our most sacred spaces. He modified our palace to accommodate her weakness. He gave her authority over an imperial heir. And now we see the results of this madness. He gestured and a holographic display activated, showing footage of Ash's recent training sessions. The young hatchling was flying short distances now, his movements awkward but determined, the wing braces gleaming in the light. "The human has made the defective hatchling functional," Blackscale continued. "And you might ask, is this not a good thing? I tell you, it is the most dangerous thing that could happen to our empire. For 3,000 years, we have maintained our strength through a simple principle: only the strong survive. The weak are culled. This ensures that every generation is stronger than the last. It is harsh, but it is necessary. It is what has made us the dominant power in the galaxy." He paused, letting his words sink in. "But if a disabled hatchling can thrive, what does that say about the thousands we have exiled? The thousands we have allowed to die? It says we were wrong. It says we committed atrocities for nothing. And if we were wrong about this, what else might we be wrong about? The human success is not a victory. It is a threat to everything we are." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the chamber. But not everyone was convinced. A younger dragon named Swiftclaw stood, her scales a brilliant copper that marked her as military caste. Perhaps being wrong isn't the disaster you think it is, she said. Perhaps admitting we were wrong and changing is what real strength looks like. I've watched the human work. I've seen what she's accomplished. And I've started wondering how many potential warriors, strategists, and innovators we've thrown away because they didn't fit our narrow definition of acceptable. The council chamber erupted into argument. Lines were being drawn, factions forming. The issue was no longer just about one human and one hatchling. It was about the entire philosophical foundation of dragon civilization, and that foundation was cracking. Outside the council chambers, the younger generation was having their own revolution. It started small, with quiet conversations in training halls and barracks. Dragons who had always felt like they didn't quite fit began talking to each other. Those with injuries that had been dismissed as weaknesses. Those with interests in scholarship rather than combat. Those who had lost family members to the culling traditions and had never been allowed to grieve. They started calling themselves the New Wings. Within weeks, they had hundreds of members. Within months, thousands. They wore copper armbands as a sign of solidarity, the same color as Swiftclaw's scales. Their message was simple but revolutionary. Adaptation is strength, diversity is power, and every dragon has value. The traditionalists were horrified. They began referring to the New Wings as traitors, as corruption of dragon purity. Tensions escalated rapidly. There were fights in public spaces, families divided, ancient friendships destroyed over ideological differences. And through it all, Emily continued her work with Ash, trying to stay out of the politics she'd accidentally created. But politics wouldn't stay away from her. The assassination attempt came during the Festival of Flames, a celebration that marked the founding of the Empire. The palace was filled with visitors, security was spread thin, and everyone was distracted by festivities. It was the perfect opportunity. Emily had returned to her quarters exhausted from a long day of helping Ash practice aerial maneuvers. She was looking forward to a shower and sleep. She didn't notice the small creature that slithered through her ventilation system until it was too late. The poison drake was barely 2 feet long, but it was one of the most deadly creatures in the known galaxy. Its venom caused paralysis followed by a slow, agonizing death. It had been carefully starved for days to make it aggressive, then released into Emily's cooling system by someone who had access to the palace's infrastructure. Someone noble, someone trusted. The creature dropped from a vent directly above Emily's bed. She saw it falling and tried to roll away, but she wasn't fast enough. The poison drake's fangs were inches from her throat when a blast of concentrated flame hit it from the side. Ash had been sleeping in the adjacent room. The sound of Emily's startled cry had woken him and he'd come running. When he saw the danger, something inside him that had always been considered broken suddenly worked better than anyone thought possible. His damaged fire chambers, which had never produced more than weak sparks, unleashed a focused jet of flame with surgical precision. The poison drake disintegrated. The blast was so intense and so controlled that it destroyed the creature without harming Emily or setting the room on fire. It was the kind of flame control that usually took dragons decades to master, and Ash had just done it on pure instinct while defending someone he cared about. The incident forced Emperor Dravener's hand. He could no longer pretend this was just about helping one hatchling. Someone had tried to murder Emily inside his palace, which meant the conspiracy against change went deep into his own court. He called an emergency session of the full High Council for the following morning. When the council convened, the Emperor did something unprecedented. He didn't take his throne at the highest point of the chamber. Instead, he stood in the center pit, the place usually reserved for those being judged. "I was wrong," he said, and the simple statement hit like a thunderclap. No dragon emperor had admitted error in 3,000 years. "I was wrong about what strength means. I was wrong about how we should treat those who are different. And we, as a civilization, have been wrong for so long that we've forgotten we had a choice." He activated his own holographic display, showing not just Ash's progress, but data Emily had compiled. Statistics about human innovation, about species that valued diversity, about civilizations that protected their vulnerable and thrived because of it. "My son was supposed to be useless," Dravener continued. "Every expert told me his life was effectively over before it began. But a human showed us we were asking the wrong questions. We were so focused on what he couldn't do that we never looked for what he could do. And last night, that useless hatchling saved a life with flame control I've rarely seen in adult warriors." He paused, looking around at the council. How many brilliant minds have we destroyed because they didn't look strong enough? How many could have been innovators, strategists, artists, scientists? How many discoveries have we lost? How much weaker have we made ourselves by demanding everyone be strong in exactly the same way? The chamber was silent. Every dragon present was wrestling with the implications. "I propose we create a new classification within our society," the Emperor said. "Not warrior caste or noble caste, but an innovation caste. Dragons who excel in intelligence, creativity, cooperation, strategy. Roles where physical power is irrelevant. Dragons like my son won't be hidden or eliminated. They'll be valued for what they can contribute." Lord Blackscale rose slowly. "You're proposing we abandon 3,000 years of tradition. That we admit our ancestors were wrong. That we change the fundamental nature of what it means to be dragon." "Yes," Dravener said simply. "I am." "Then you are no longer fit to rule," Blackscale declared. "I call for a vote of no confidence. All in favor of removing Emperor Dravener from power." 6 claws rose. 6 dragons voted to keep him. The council was split exactly in half. "Then we are at an impasse," Blackscale said. "And tradition provides only one solution to such deadlock. Trial by combat or civil war. Choose." The Emperor looked around the chamber, seeing his empire tearing itself apart over questions one human had forced them to confront. In her quarters, Emily watched the broadcast and realized with growing horror that her simple act of kindness on a space station had ignited a conflict that could reshape the galaxy or destroy it entirely. Civil war was no longer a possibility. It was inevitable. And it would begin within days. The Dragon Civil War erupted 3 days after the Council's deadlock, and it was unlike any conflict the galaxy had ever witnessed. Traditional wars between dragons involved territorial disputes or succession challenges, but this was something entirely different. This was a war of ideas, and those are always the bloodiest kind. Emperor Dravener's forces held the capital and the loyalty of roughly half the military. The new wings flocked to his banner by the thousands, young dragons who had been waiting for someone to give voice to their doubts about the old ways. But Lord Blackscale commanded the outer territories and had the support of the traditionalist nobles who controlled vast resources and ancient fortresses. What shocked everyone was what happened next. The conflict that should have been an internal dragon matter suddenly became galactic news when other species began choosing sides. The Centauri coalition sent medical supplies and support staff to Dravener's forces. The Regelian Commerce Guild, which had been quietly resentful of dragon dominance for centuries, provided funding and intelligence. Even small species that had never dared oppose dragons before began speaking out in support of the Emperor's reforms. They weren't supporting Dravener because they loved dragons. They were supporting the idea that strength could mean something other than the ability to destroy. They were supporting a universe where being different wasn't a death sentence. Emily watched the war unfold from the relative safety of the palace. Though safety was a relative term when battles were being fought in the skies above. She continued working with Ash partly because the young dragon needed the routine, but mostly because she needed something to focus on besides the guilt that was eating her alive. Every casualty report felt personal. Every dragon who died was dying because she'd picked up a scared hatchling in a marketplace. "It's not your fault," Ash told her one evening when he found her staring at casualty lists. His voice had gotten deeper over the months, though he was still young. "This was always coming. You just made it happen sooner. And maybe that's better. Maybe fast and painful is better than slow rot." The war lasted exactly 23 days. It was brief by historical standards, but the intensity was staggering. The deciding battle took place above the dragon homeworld itself, a massive aerial engagement that lit up the sky like a second sun. When the smoke cleared, Dravener's forces had won, but the cost was apparent in the burned territories and the lists of the fallen. Lord Blackscale died in that final battle, taking a direct hit while leading a desperate charge. His last words, witnessed by dozens, were reported across the Empire: "I die for what I believe. Let history judge if I was wrong." Even in victory, those words haunted Dravener, because he understood them. Blackscale hadn't been evil. He genuinely believed he was protecting dragon civilization from corruption. The empire that emerged from the war was fundamentally different from what had existed before. Emperor Dravener stood in the rebuilt council chambers 6 weeks after the fighting ended and announced the creation of what he called the Human Protocol. The name was deliberate, a way of ensuring no one forgot where these ideas had originated. The protocol had 3 core principles, each one a rejection of traditional dragon philosophy. First, judge individuals by their potential contributions, not by their appearance or physical capabilities. Second, treat differences as opportunities for innovation rather than flaws to be eliminated. Third, protect the vulnerable as an investment in the future, not a burden to be discarded. It sounded simple when stated that way, but implementing it meant rebuilding dragon society from the foundation up. New schools were established that taught cooperation alongside combat. The innovation cast that Dravener had proposed became real, with dragons of all physical capabilities welcomed based on their intellectual and creative abilities. Laws that had stood for millennia were rewritten or abolished entirely. The changes rippled outward from the dragon homeworld like waves from a stone dropped in still water. Other species watched with fascination as the galaxy's most feared warriors began transforming themselves. Some were skeptical, certain it was a trick or that dragons would revert to their old ways. But others saw opportunity. Human medical and therapeutic techniques, which had been dismissed as irrelevant before, suddenly became sought after across the galaxy. Doctors and therapists from Earth found themselves recruited to alien worlds they'd only read about in textbooks. Physical therapy, occupational therapy, psychological counseling, adaptive device design, fields that humans had developed over centuries became valuable galactic exports overnight. Earth itself underwent a remarkable transformation. The planet that had been considered a backwater, notable only for producing decent coffee and having an unusually high tolerance for bureaucratic chaos, suddenly found itself at the center of galactic attention. Universities that had struggled to attract alien students now had waiting lists. Research facilities that had been underfunded were suddenly receiving grants from species that wanted to learn human approaches to problem solving. The Galactic Council's power structure shifted dramatically. Dragons were still militarily dominant, but they began forming true partnerships rather than imposing their will through threat of force. The council chambers, which had functioned more like a dragon court where other species came to beg for favors, became an actual deliberative body where different perspectives were valued. Ash grew into his role as the living symbol of these changes. His wing braces evolved from crude medical devices into elegant prosthetics that he wore as proudly as any warrior wore battle scars. He became the Dragon Empire's official ambassador to Earth, splitting his time between the homeworld and humanity's capital. When he spoke at interspecies conferences about disability, accommodation, and the value of diversity, audiences listened with rapt attention. His authority came not from physical dominance, but from the authenticity of his experience and the obvious truth of his message. Emily was offered everything. Titles of nobility, wealth beyond measure, a permanent position as chief medical advisor to the Dragon Empire with her own staff and unlimited resources. Delegations from a dozen species arrived to offer her prestigious positions. She could have written her own ticket to anywhere in the galaxy. She turned it all down. 6 months after the war ended, Emily Brooks quietly boarded a commercial transport back to Meridian Cross Station. She returned to her small apartment, put on her work uniform, and showed up for her next shift at Joe's Earth Cafe like she'd never left. Her manager stared at her in disbelief. "You're back? I thought you were, like, ruling an empire or something." Emily tied her apron and checked the coffee machines. "Nah, I just helped out with a patient for a while. You still need someone for the morning shift." News of her return spread quickly despite her attempts to stay quiet. Reporters showed up. She refused all interviews. Dignitaries requested meetings. She politely declined. She just wanted to go back to her normal life, or as normal as life could be when you'd accidentally triggered a civil war and reshaped galactic civilization. But normal wasn't quite possible anymore. Human customers at the cafe looked at her with awe. Alien visitors made detours to Meridian Cross just to see the human who had changed Dragon society. Parents brought their children by to meet her, wanting them to understand that one person really could make a difference. Emily handled it all with the same practical attitude she'd shown when picking up a scared hatchling. She was polite but firm about her boundaries. She served coffee, wiped down tables, and went home at the end of her shift. She didn't think of herself as special. She'd just done what needed doing. 3 years after the war, Emperor Dravener made one final visit to Meridian Cross. He came alone, without guards or announcement, walking into Joe's Earth Cafe during a slow afternoon like any other customer. Emily looked up from the register and wasn't even surprised. "Your usual table?" she asked. They sat by the window overlooking the station's commercial district, the same area where everything had started. Dravener looked older somehow, though dragons aged slowly. The weight of transformation showed in other ways. "I wanted to tell you something," he said. "You taught us that strength isn't what you're born with. It's what you choose to protect." Emily poured him coffee, the human beverage he'd learned to tolerate and had even grown to enjoy. "You taught yourselves," she replied. "I just carried your son when he fell. You're the ones who decided to catch him. You're the ones who changed everything." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the diverse flow of beings moving through the marketplace. Species that had once avoided each other now mingled freely. A young dragon hatchling with mobility aids played with human children near the fountain. An elderly centauri leaned on a support frame designed by human engineers. The galaxy was different now, more complicated, more accommodating, more aware that strength came in countless forms. As the Emperor prepared to leave, he paused at the cafe door and looked back at Emily. She'd already moved on to wiping down tables, her attention focused on the simple task at hand. She looked completely ordinary, unremarkable even. Just a human in a work uniform doing her job. And that's what made her terrifying, Dravener realized. Humans weren't strong because they could dominate others. They were strong because they survived anyway, thrived anyway, built anyway despite their physical limitations. And they did it while lifting up everyone around them, sharing their innovations, teaching their methods, extending hands to those who had fallen. The galaxy had spent millennia underestimating humanity, dismissing them as weak and irrelevant. That era was over. The human protocol was spreading to species that had never even met humans, the philosophy transcending its origins. Earth had become synonymous with innovation, adaptation, and the radical idea that every being had inherent value. As Emperor Dravener's ship lifted away from Meridian Cross, he carried with him the knowledge that the small human who'd changed his empire wasn't special because of power or destiny. She was special because she'd seen someone who needed help and helped them, consequences be damned. The galaxy would never underestimate humans again. And that was exactly as it should be.